When I talk about preserving the conditions that nourish the best features of the American order, I recognize that liberty alone is insufficient. Virtue, which requires religion, is also necessary. To be sure, classical liberals and the critics acknowledge that virtue and religion are necessary for a flourishing society. But the critics contend that classical liberalism itself necessarily, inevitably, undermines the very conditions that make its own existence possible. In other words, that classical liberalism is cannibalistic. They argue, or at least imply, that individual rights rot a free society from the inside. If they're right, then it is futile to try to foster a Christian culture within a classically liberal order for the long term. This is why we hear more and more talk today about integralism, about unseparating church and state, about Christian monarchists. At risk of oversimplifying, I will say that those conversations don't sound like they're about restoring a Christian culture, but about restoring Christendom. So let me counter one Catholic intellectual movement with another. Not only Catholic intellectual movements, of course, but largely populated by such folks. Let me counter it with another, namely the movement that culminated in the Second Vatican Council, and specifically the papal encyclical on religious freedom, Dignitatis Humanae. The critics are correct to worry about rights when rights come to mean the freedom to do whatever you feel like doing. But the best versions of classical liberalism have never accepted that. The correct view is embodied in the old distinction in our language that I always like to teach my students between liberty and license. License is the freedom to do what you want. Liberty is the freedom to pursue the good. What is so important about Dignitatis Humanae is that it points us to a proper understanding of rights by grounding the right of religious freedom in the good of religion. Rights are justified in virtue of the goods they allow us to pursue. That is, we cannot understand what rights are and which rights are until we understand what rights are for. To recover a proper account of rights, we must start with a proper account of goods and the good. Once we know what is truly good for our nature, what is truly part of human flourishing, then we can know which rights are real and which aren't. Free speech, for example, is essential to the good of truth because true knowledge must be held in light of all available evidence and arguments. And religious freedom is essential to the good of religion because in order to be genuine, it must be freely chosen. The rights protect the goods. Here is a line from the opening section of Dignitatis Humanae. Religious freedom, in turn, which men demand as necessary to fulfill their duty to worship God, has to do with immunity from coercion in civil society. Therefore, it leaves untouched traditional Catholic doctrine, and I think here we could say broadly Christian doctrine, on the moral duty of men and societies toward the true religion and toward the one church of Christ. Underpinning the right is a good, even a duty here, toward which the right points and which it safeguards.